The air was thin enough to burn. At 11,000 feet, the high-altitude warfare training center was a collection of gray, geothermal-heated prefabs clinging to the granite face of a mountain like a desperate lichen. It was a place for breaking men. Forging them, the brochures said. But Anya Sharma, standing with her duffel at her feet, knew the distinction was often academic. Send her home, the words, crackling from a radio on the receiving clerk's desk, were not meant for her, but they found her anyway. They were a statement of fact, an order already decided. The clerk, a corporal barely out of his teens, flinched. He glanced at Anya, then back at his screen. Sir, her transfer orders are from command level. It's confirmed. A pause, filled with the static of immense distance and irritation. I don't care if they're from God, Corporal. Look at her file. She's a 43-year-old logistics specialist with a decade-long desk tour. This is the serpent's tooth. We don't have the resources for remedial training or medevacs for sprained ankles. Find a pretext. Send her home. The radio clicked off. The turning point had arrived before she'd even been assigned a bunk. Anya hadn't moved. Her face, a mask of calm sculpted by years of discipline, betrayed nothing. She watched a lone eagle trace a lazy circle in the unforgiving blue sky, its movements economical, precise. It wasted nothing. The corporal, whose name tag read Sato, swallowed hard. He looked at the woman before him. She wasn't large or imposing. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, regulation bun, showing threads of silver at the temples. Her frame was lean, wiry, but seemed lost inside the standard-issue fatigues. There was a stillness about her that was unnerving, a stark contrast to the loud, restless energy of the young commandos who usually passed through this way station. He saw what the colonel saw, a mistake. A piece of administrative driftwood washed up on the most inhospitable shore the army had to offer. "Ma'am," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "Colonel Thorne, he's particular about readiness." Anya's gaze shifted from the window to him. Her eyes were dark, patient. They held no anger, no fear, no indignation. They simply observed. "I am ready, Corporal," she said. Her voice was low, steady, another instrument of quiet efficiency. She had been in places like this before, though none so high. Places where the environment was the primary enemy and human error was a fatal luxury. The biting wind that whipped around the corner of the building, carrying the scent of pine and cold stone, was a familiar adversary. The suspicion in the eyes of the young soldiers clattering past in their heavy boots was a language she understood intimately. They saw a mother, an aunt, a bureaucrat. They saw a weak link. She saw them as they were, strong, eager, and dangerously unaware of their own limitations. They were tools that had not yet been properly tempered. Sato, fumbling with his keyboard, finally found a barracks assignment. Barracks C, Bunk 27. "Co-ed, ma'am." "All we have," he said it like an apology. Another potential reason for her to request a transfer back to whatever quiet, comfortable desk she'd come from. "Understood," Anya said. She shouldered her duffel bag. The weight didn't make her stagger. She moved with a centered, balanced grace that was easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. As she turned to leave, she paused. "Corporal Sato," she said, her eyes flicking to the large, three-dimensional map of the training area on the wall. The centerpiece was a jagged, winding ridge labeled the Serpent's Tooth. "What is the current record for the course?" Sato blinked, caught off guard. The Serpent's Tooth? It's not really a course you just run for time, ma'am. It's a qualification. Everything is run for time, Anya stated, not as a question, but as a quiet correction. Right? Well, the unofficial base record is held by a Navy SEAL instructor from 2 years ago. 9 minutes, 47 seconds. But the course has been modified since then. Made harder. No one's broken 11 minutes on the new configuration. He felt foolish relaying this information. It was like telling a tourist the lap times at a Formula One race. Anya nodded slowly, her eyes tracing the impossible contours of the ridge on the map. She absorbed the angles, the elevations, the marked obstacles. Her mind was already there, feeling the grit of the rock, the pull of gravity, the burn of the thin air. "Thank you, Corporal," she said, and walked out into the wind, leaving a deeply confused young soldier in her wake. He looked from his screen, with its cold, dismissive transfer recommendation from the colonel, to the door she had just exited. For the first time, he felt a sliver of doubt, not in her, but in the colonel's confident assessment. The eagle outside was gone. The sky was empty. The dismissal came less than an hour later. Colonel Marcus Thorne did not summon her to his office. He intercepted her outside the mess hall, a deliberate power play to address her on his ground, in the open, where his authority was absolute. He was a tall man, made taller by his rigid posture, his face weathered by sun and certainty. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, swept over her with unconcealed disdain. "Sharma," he barked. It wasn't a greeting. It was an accusation. Anya stopped, setting her empty tray on a nearby return rack. She faced him and stood at a relaxed parade rest, a position of respect that was also perfectly balanced. "Ready." "Colonel," she replied, her tone even. "I've read your file," he began, his voice a low growl that cut through the chatter of the nearby soldiers. "Or what's left of it. 10 years as a logistics coordinator at Fort Belvoir. Before that, a series of assignments so heavily redacted they might as well be blank pages. Now, Command, in its infinite wisdom, has seen fit to transfer a 43-year-old quartermaster to the most physically demanding training environment on the continent. I want you to explain that to me." He was baiting her, looking for an emotional response. He wanted indignation, a defensive speech, an excuse. He wanted a reason to confirm his bias. Anya gave him none of it. "My orders are to report here for active duty, sir." "I have done so." Thorne's jaw tightened. He took a step closer, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial, condescending hiss. "Let's be direct, Sharma. I don't know what political favors you called in, or what diversity quota you're here to fill. I don't care. What I care about is the lives of the soldiers at this facility. You are a liability. Your fitness scores are borderline for a 20-year-old, let alone you. Your presence here is a clerical error, and I will rectify it." Her stillness was her shield. She let his words wash over her, analyzing them not for their emotional content, but for their tactical meaning. He was proud. He was territorial. He saw the world through the narrow lens of physical strength and overt aggression. He could not see the 100 other forms of strength that mattered more. "What are my duties, Colonel?" she asked, her gaze unwavering. The simple question seemed to enrage him more than any argument could have. He had expected a fight or a retreat. He was not prepared for quiet compliance. "Duties?" He let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of humor. "Your duty is to stay out of the way. I've assigned you to inventory management. You'll be in the supply depot at the base of the mountain. Count nuts and bolts. Relabel shelves. When the next supply convoy arrives in 3 weeks, you'll be on it, heading back down. Am I clear?" The supply depot. It was a pointedly demeaning assignment, a task for a raw private, not a specialist with her years of service. It was also, she noted, located directly adjacent to the starting point of the Serpent's Tooth qualification course. An interesting coincidence. "Crystal, sir," she said. The single word, delivered with the same flat calm, was the end of the conversation. She offered no protest, no sign of wounded pride. She simply accepted the order. Thorne stared at her for a moment longer, searching for a crack in her composure. He found nothing. It was like talking to a stone wall. He felt a flash of frustration. He had wanted to provoke her into an act of insubordination, to make his decision to remove her an easy one. Instead, she had simply absorbed his hostility and asked for her task. It was unsettling. "Dismissed?" he grunted, turning his back on her with a finality that broadcast his contempt to anyone watching. And many were. The young soldiers in the mess hall line had fallen silent, watching the exchange. They saw their formidable commander dress down the old woman. They saw her take it without a flicker of expression. Their conclusion was the same as Thorne's. She was weak, a bureaucratic ghost. Anya turned and walked toward the supply depot. She did not look back. Inside her mind, there was no anger. There was only calculation. The colonel had given her a task. He had also given her a location. He thought he was shunting her aside, placing her in a forgotten corner of his kingdom. He had no idea he had just given her the perfect observation post. He had put the wolf in charge of the sheep pen, and he was too arrogant to even consider that she might have teeth. Her file wasn't blank pages, she thought. It was a series of closed, locked doors. And Colonel Thorne had never even thought to ask what might be behind them. The supply depot was a cavernous metal shed filled with the smell of canvas, oil, and cold steel. It was organized with the kind of chaotic logic only a long-term military institution could produce. Boxes of climbing ropes from one decade were stacked next to snowshoes from another. Carabiners were sorted by color instead of load rating. It was a mess. For Anya, it was a sanctuary. Her days fell into a quiet, meticulous rhythm. While the elite soldiers of the training center grunted and sweated their way through conditioning exercises under the unforgiving sun, Anya brought order to chaos. She didn't just count nuts and bolts, as Thorne had mockingly ordered. She disassembled, cleaned, and reassembled everything. She tested the tensile strength of old ropes, discarding those that showed the slightest fraying. She oiled and calibrated the intricate moving parts of ski bindings and ice axes. She worked with an unnerving, silent focus that made the depot's other assigned soldier, a lanky private named Cohen who was nursing a knee injury, deeply uncomfortable. "You don't have to, do all that," he said one afternoon, watching her meticulously respooling 100 meters of climbing rope, checking every inch for wear. "Just count the boxes and fill out the form. That's all they want." Anya didn't look up. "If a thing is worth doing," she said, her fingers working with the fluid precision of a surgeon, "it is worth doing correctly." But her real work began when she was alone. The depot's main door faced the staging area for the Serpent's Tooth. From the shadows of the doorway, or through a grime-streaked window she had carefully cleaned, she watched. She observed everything. The Serpent's Tooth was not a simple obstacle course. It was an integrated vertical assault simulation carved into the natural rock of the mountain. It began with a timed gear-up, a sprint to a sheer 30-meter rock face, a technical climb, a traverse across a gorge on a single rope, followed by a rappel down a treacherous overhang. The final stretch was a low crawl through a series of natural tunnels and a final, lung-searing scramble to a beacon at the summit. The entire course was peppered with automated targets that participants had to engage with laser training rifles. Miss a target and a 5-second penalty was added to your time. Fail an obstacle and you were disqualified. Anya didn't just watch the soldiers. She deconstructed their every move. She saw the young, muscular ones try to power through the climb, wasting energy and losing their grip on the cold rock. She saw the lean, fast ones rush the traverse, their momentum causing them to swing wildly, costing them precious seconds to stabilize. She watched them struggle with knots, their fingers clumsy and slow in the thin, cold air. Her mind became a silent ledger of their mistakes. She noted the prevailing wind direction between 1400 and 1600 hours, how it gusted unpredictably around the overhang, pushing repelling soldiers off their intended line. She mentally mapped the rock face, identifying 3 separate routes to the top, 2 of which were less obvious but offered better handholds and required less upper body strength. She timed the cycle of the pop-up targets, realizing they weren't random but followed a set, repeating pattern. Private Sato, the clerk from her first day, made regular trips to the depot to drop off supply requisitions. He was a quiet, observant young man, and he started to notice things others missed. He saw that Anya was never idle. When she wasn't working, she was watching the course, her posture utterly still, her focus absolute. One day, he found her holding 2 different models of carabiner in her hands, her eyes closed. "Ma'am?" he'd asked hesitantly. Her eyes snapped open, startlingly alert. "This one," she said. holding up the slightly older, heavier model, has a gate spring with a 3-millisecond lag compared to the newer one. In this temperature, that could mean the difference between a clean clip and a fumble. Sato just stared. He had never, in his entire life, heard anyone talk about a carabiner's gate spring. He started to understand. She wasn't just counting inventory. She was studying. She was preparing. The thought was so at odds with her official role and the colonel's open contempt that it felt like a secret he was now a part of. He saw her practicing knots on a loose piece of rope at her desk, her hands a blur, tying and untying a figure eight, a butterfly loop, a prusik over and over until the motions were as unconscious as breathing. He saw her staring at the mountain for long stretches, not at the course itself, but at the shifting shadows, the patterns of snowmelt, the way the light changed on the rock. She was a ghost in the system, a woman everyone had dismissed, hiding in plain sight. They saw an aging clerk in a dusty depot. Sato was beginning to see a predator, patiently learning the terrain of its new hunting ground. The colonel had sent her here to be forgotten, but Anya Sharma did not know how to be forgotten. She only knew how to observe, to analyze, and to wait for the moment when observation would need to become action. The pressure arrived as a voice on the radio, a crackle of static and doom from the meteorological station 60 miles away. "Be advised, high command elements," the disembodied voice announced, flat and professional. "Anomalous cyclonic system forming over the western range. Projecting rapid intensification. We are forecasting blizzard conditions at your elevation within 36 hours. Estimated duration 2 to 3 weeks. Repeat, 2 to 3 weeks." A sudden, palpable tension descended upon the training center. Being snowed in was expected in winter, but this was late autumn, a crucial qualification window. The Serpent's Tooth wasn't just a training exercise. It was the final gateway for soldiers deploying to the mountainous border regions. Colonel Thorne had a quota to meet. Command wanted 30 qualified operators. He had 12. Panic is a subtle acid. It began in the control tower with Thorne's barked orders, then seeped down into the ranks. The training schedule, once methodical, became frantic. Squads were rushed to the course, one after another, with minimal rest. The calm, professional atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a frantic energy that bred mistakes. Anya watched from the depot doorway as a young ranger, exhausted and hurried, failed to properly lock his harness before the traverse. He swung out over the gorge and was brought up short with a jarring jolt that nearly dislocated his shoulder. He hung there, limp and disqualified, cursing into the wind. An hour later, a Marine recon specialist, trying to set a speed record on the rappel, misjudged the overhang and slammed into the rock face, cracking 2 ribs. The medtechs were becoming as busy as the course instructors. The temperature was dropping, and a cruel, biting wind began to scour the mountainside. The rock face, warmed by the afternoon sun just yesterday, was now slick with a thin, almost invisible layer of ice in the shaded sections. Handholds became treacherous. Ropes grew stiff and difficult to handle. "They're rushing," Anya said quietly to no one in particular. Private Cohen, his leg propped up on a crate of MREs, grunted in agreement. "Colonel's riding everyone hard," he said, wincing as another curse echoed up from the course. "Wants his numbers. Doesn't matter how many guys get banged up in the process." Anya's gaze was fixed on the traverse, the single-rope bridge spanning a 50-foot chasm. It was the course's great psychological hurdle. The technique was simple: clip in with 2 points of contact, pull yourself across hand over hand. But the exposure was immense. Below was nothing but 1,000 feet of empty, unforgiving air. She saw soldiers hesitate, their movements becoming jerky and inefficient as their minds fixated on the drop. They were fighting the fear instead of focusing on the task. Inside the control tower, Colonel Thorne stared at the bank of monitors, his face a grim mask. Each disqualified soldier was a personal failure. His reputation was built on producing the best, and his best were failing. The pressure from his own superiors was mounting with every passing hour. "Next man up," he snapped into his microphone. Let's go, let's go. That snow isn't going to wait for you. On the course, another soldier, a private named Garcia, was trembling at the edge of the traverse platform. He was young, barely 20, and had aced the climb. But now, staring at the rope disappearing into the wind, he was frozen. "Move it, Garcia!" the instructor at the platform yelled, his voice strained. "You're holding up the whole damn rotation." Garcia clipped his carabiner onto the rope, his hands shaking so badly he had to try 3 times. He took a deep breath and launched himself off the platform. His form was all wrong. Instead of a smooth, controlled glide, he dropped, his body swinging like a pendulum. His helmet smacked against the rock wall of the chasm with a sickening crack audible even over the wind. He went limp, dangling unconscious from his harness in the middle of the gorge. A collective gasp went through the observers. The crisis had just escalated from a series of minor failures to a life-threatening emergency. The incident on the traverse sent a shockwave of stillness through the frantic base. On the monitors in the control tower, the image was stark. The limp form of Private Garcia suspended over the abyss. The designated rescue team, already dispatched to deal with the soldier with the cracked ribs, was on the far side of the facility. Their response time would be at least 10 minutes. In the thin, cold air with a potential head injury, 10 minutes was an eternity. "Where is my rescue team?" Thorne roared into the radio, his voice tight with fury and a flicker of genuine fear. "Engaged with the previous casualty, sir. Say 10 mics," came the flustered reply. The instructor on the traverse platform was a good climber, but not a specialist in high-angle rescue. He was preparing to rig a complex pulley system to haul Garcia back, a procedure that was slow, cumbersome, and carried its own risks. Every soldier on the ground and in the tower was a spectator to the unfolding disaster, frozen by procedure and protocol. All except one. Anya had seen the impact. She had seen Garcia go limp. Before anyone had even processed what had happened, she was moving. There was no hesitation, no request for permission. She dropped the inventory list she was holding and strode out of the supply depot. She moved with a purpose that was terrifying in its intensity. She bypassed the official staging area and went straight to a secondary cache of emergency gear she herself had organized. A small, unassuming crate she had packed with a lightweight harness, a compact ascender, and a specific length of static rope she had personally inspected. "Hey, ma'am, you can't." Private Cohen started to call after her, but the words died in his throat. The woman who had been quietly counting bolts a moment ago was gone. In her place was someone else entirely. She clipped on the harness and cinched it tight in 3 fluid motions. She didn't run to the platform. She moved in a ground-eating lope that was both fast and perfectly efficient, conserving energy. She arrived at the instructor's side just as he was fumbling with a knot. "Give me your rope," she commanded. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the wind and the man's panic with the authority of a rifle shot. The instructor, a staff sergeant, stared at her, bewildered. "Who the hell are you?" Anya didn't answer. She simply took the rope from his hands. Her fingers flew, tying a Munter mule hitch, a complex but incredibly secure and easily releasable rescue knot. Took her less than 4 seconds. She clipped it to a new anchor point she had identified days ago, a solid flake of granite ignored by the standard course design. "Belay me," she ordered, and before the sergeant could protest, she was over the edge. She didn't rappel. She performed a controlled, high-speed drop, using the friction of the rope and her gloved hands to brake, landing with feather-light precision on a small 2-inch ledge just above the dangling private. She was a spider on a thread, completely at home in the vertical world. Working with an economy of motion that was breathtaking to witness, she attached a secondary line to Garcia's harness. She checked his pulse, tilting his head back to ensure his airway was clear. He was breathing shallowly. "Garcia," she said, her voice calm and close to his ear. "You're secure. We're going to get you back." Then she did something no one expected. Instead of trying to haul him up, which would put immense strain on his unconscious body, she clipped him directly to her own harness. With a powerful kick off the rock face, She used her momentum to swing them both like a pendulum, not back toward the platform they had left, but forward, toward the far side of the chasm. It was a move of incredible audacity and pinpoint calculation. They soared across the gap, a single dark shape against the sky. She landed them on the receiving platform with a jolt, immediately unclipped him, and laid him gently on the metal grating. The entire intervention, from the moment she left the depot to the moment Garcia was safe, had taken less than 90 seconds. The medtechs, arriving breathless and late, rushed forward. Anya stepped back, melting into the background as they began their work. The staff sergeant on the first platform stared across the chasm, his mouth hanging open. In the control tower, Colonel Thorne stood rigid, his knuckles white where he gripped the console. He had watched the entire event on the main monitor, a high-definition feed capturing every impossible detail. He had seen her movements, the knot, the swing. It wasn't just competent. It was flawless. It was the kind of performance he had seen only once or twice before, from operators at the absolute apex of the Special Forces world. Anya walked back across the traverse rope, her movements as casual as if she were crossing a street. She didn't look at the instructor. She didn't look up at the control tower. She walked back to the supply depot, picked up her inventory list, and went back to work, her face an unreadable mask of calm. The wind howled around her, but inside the depot, there was only the quiet scratch of her pen on the paper. She had not done it for them. She had done it because it was necessary. The machine had broken and she had fixed it. It was as simple as that. The silence that followed the rescue was more profound than any noise. On the course, the next soldier in line looked from the now empty traverse to the distant, closed door of the supply depot. His expression a mixture of awe and confusion. The frantic pace had been broken. No one was shouting anymore. The name Garcia was on everyone's lips, but the image in their minds was of the quiet, middle-aged logistics clerk swinging across a chasm with an unconscious man clipped to her harness. Word of the incident spread through the base like a current of electricity. It wasn't official. There were no announcements. It was a story told in hushed tones in the mess hall, in the barracks, in the maintenance bays. The details became mythic in the retelling. Some said she had run along the rope. Others claimed she had tied the knot with one hand. The core facts, however, were undeniable. The logistics clerk, the woman Thorne had dismissed as a liability, had performed a textbook-perfect, high-angle rescue faster than the dedicated response team could even arrive. In the control tower, Colonel Thorne replayed the security footage. He zoomed in, slowed it down, watched it again. He saw the knot, the Munter mule, a classic, but tied with a speed and confidence that spoke of thousands of repetitions. He saw the way she positioned her body on the rock face, using her legs to absorb the shock, keeping her center of gravity low. He saw the calculated risk of the pendulum swing, a maneuver that was not in any standard rescue manual. It was a high-consequence improvisation, the hallmark of an operator who doesn't just know the rules but understands the principles behind them so deeply that they know exactly when and how to break them. He pulled up her file again. Logistics Specialist Anya Sharma. Fort Belvoir. Age 43. Fitness scores that met the minimum standard, no more. He cross-referenced her name with special operations databases. Nothing. No records of service with the Rangers, SEALs, or Delta Force. It was a blank. The woman on his screen and the woman in the file could not be the same person. The discrepancy gnawed at him, an affront to his orderly, hierarchical world. His dismissal had curdled into a grudging, intense curiosity. He found himself watching the supply depot, a building he hadn't given a second thought to in years. He saw her through his office window, sweeping the entrance ramp with the same focused economy of motion she had used on the rock face. Every movement had a purpose. There was no wasted energy. The assumptions of the soldiers had also been shattered. The dismissive glances and quiet jokes ceased entirely. When Anya entered the mess hall now, a bubble of silence and space formed around her. It wasn't fear. It was a profound, uncertain respect. They didn't know what she was, but they knew she was not what she seemed. They watched her eat, her movements deliberate and unhurried, searching for a clue, a sign of the incredible skill she had so briefly, shockingly, revealed. Private Sato was no longer confused. He was certain. He approached her at the end of the day, just as she was locking the depot. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet. "Private Garcia. The medic said he has a concussion, but he'll be fine. They said whoever got him down saved his life." Anya finished turning the key in the lock and straightened up, facing him. The setting sun cast long shadows, and for a moment, her face was unreadable. "Good," she said. "That is good news. The colonel has been replaying the footage all afternoon," Sato added, offering the piece of intelligence like a gift. "He doesn't understand." "He doesn't need to," Anya replied. "He needs qualified soldiers. The storm is still coming." She started to walk toward the barracks, and Sato fell into step beside her. The wind was colder now, carrying the first sharp scent of snow. The towering peak of the Serpent's Tooth was silhouetted against a darkening, bruised purple sky. "They're going to run one more group in the morning," Sato said. "A final push before the storm hits. It's a volunteer list. Only the best guys are signing up. They all want to prove themselves now." Anya nodded, her gaze fixed on the mountain. She had shown them a glimpse of what was possible. Now they were trying to emulate it, driven by pride. It was predictable. It was also dangerous. The shift in perception was complete. She was no longer the invisible woman, the administrative error. She was an enigma, and Colonel Thorne, a man who hated puzzles he couldn't solve, was about to put her to a second, much more public, test. The curiosity had become a challenge. He couldn't send her home now. That would be an admission of his own mistake. He had to see for himself. He had to know. The morning air was razor-sharp. A heavy, pregnant gray sky pressed down on the mountains, and the first few flakes of snow drifted lazily, like advanced scouts for the coming blizzard. The temperature had plummeted overnight. The Serpent's Tooth looked malevolent, its granite surfaces dusted with white, promising treacherous footing. The final qualification run had taken on the air of a gladiatorial contest. The entire off-duty population of the base had gathered, lining the perimeter of the staging area, their breath pluming in the frigid air. They weren't just there to see who passed. They were there for her. Colonel Thorne had found her at dawn, as she was conducting her solitary ritual of stretching in the pre-dawn gloom. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "The volunteer list for the final run is full, Sharma," he had said, his voice flat, devoid of its earlier contempt. It was replaced by something else. Challenge. "But I've saved a spot. For you." It wasn't a request. It was an order delivered as a challenge. "Fail, and you prove my first instinct was right. Succeed, and, well, he didn't know. But he had to know. The puzzle of her was an irritation he could no longer tolerate. "I need one more qualified operator to meet my quota," he stated, his gaze hard. "The course is open." Anya had simply nodded. "Understood, Colonel." Now she stood in the staging area. She was dressed in the same fatigues as everyone else, but she seemed smaller, older, utterly out of place amongst the hardened, muscular young men who were her fellow competitors. They gave her a wide berth, their gazes a mixture of skepticism and the newfound respect born from yesterday's events. Thorne's voice boomed over the loudspeaker from the control tower. "Conditions are at minimums. The course is live. Time starts on my mark. Good luck, gentlemen, and Specialist Sharma." The slight pause before her name was deliberate, singling her out. Anya ignored it. She was in her own world, performing her final gear check. Her movements were a blur of practiced efficiency. She double-checked her harness, the clips of her carabiners, the balance of the training rifle slung across her back. Her focus was absolute, a bubble of pure concentration in the charged atmosphere. Beside her, a young, cocky Marine captain, renowned for his strength, smirked. "Don't hurt yourself, Grandma," he muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Anya didn't even glance at him. Her world had shrunk to the task ahead. The mountain, the clock, the mission. Nothing else existed. On my mark. Thorn's voice echoed. 3, 2, 1. Mark. The group exploded from the starting line. The Marine captain shot into the lead, his powerful legs churning. Anya started not with a sprint, but with a controlled, rhythmic run that seemed almost slow by comparison. The crowd murmured. They had expected lightning after what they'd seen yesterday. This was methodical. She reached the gear-up station last. The others fumbled with cold fingers, rushing to clip on their gear. Anya's hands were a blur. Harness on, ropes clipped, rifle secured. She was done in half the time of the fastest man and was moving toward the rock face while others were still struggling. She didn't take the direct, obvious route up the face that everyone else was fighting for. She veered to the right, to the section she had identified from the depot, the one that looked steeper but was covered in a network of small, efficient crimps and ledges. Her movements were like a dancer's. She didn't pull herself up with her arms. She pushed with her legs, her body held close to the rock, conserving energy. She flowed up the face, her movements silent and fluid, while the grunts and scrapes of the other climbers echoed across the staging area. She reached the top of the climb first, a full 10 seconds ahead of the captain. The crowd, which had been skeptical, fell silent. In the control tower, Thorn leaned forward, his eyes locked on her monitor. At that moment, a supply convoy that had beaten the storm rolled to a stop near the command building. A man in his late 50s, with the craggy face of a career soldier and the stripes of a sergeant major on his sleeve, climbed out of the lead vehicle. He stretched, his back popping, and his gaze drifted toward the activity on the Serpent's Tooth. He saw the figures on the rock face, and his eyes narrowed, drawn to the one moving with impossible grace. Anya reached the traverse. She didn't pause. She clipped in with 2 smooth, practiced clicks and launched herself across the rope, her body low, pulling hand over hand with a powerful, steady rhythm. There was no swing, no wasted motion. She was a machine. The sergeant major walked slowly toward the control tower, his eyes never leaving the course. He saw the figure reach the far platform, unclip, and immediately drop into the rappel. He watched her navigate the icy overhang, not by fighting it, but by using it, kicking off the slick patches to guide her descent. He entered the control tower, the cold air rushing in with him. The technicians barely noticed, their attention fixed on the screens. "Colonel Thorn?" the sergeant major asked, his voice a low rumble. Thorn didn't turn. "What is it, Vance?" "I'm busy." "With all due respect, sir," Sergeant Major Elias Vance said, his eyes now glued to the main screen showing Anya's progress. "You need to see this." Thorn grunted, irritated. "I am seeing it. Specialist Sharma is having a good run." Anya was now in the low-crawl tunnels, moving like a reptile, the training rifle on her back never snagging, her speed relentless. The automated targets popped up. Zap, zap, zap. 3 precise hits from awkward, contorted positions. No penalties. Vance's breath caught. He stepped closer to Thorn, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Sir, a good run? Do you know who that is?" "A logistics clerk from Fort Belvoir who's gotten lucky twice," Thorn snapped, his pride still smarting. Vance shook his head slowly, a strange, sad smile on his lips. "No, sir. That's not a logistics clerk. Look at how she moves. The efficiency. The way she reads the terrain 3 steps ahead. That's not something you learn in a depot." He pointed a thick finger at the screen, where Anya was now in the final, brutal scramble to the summit beacon. "I've only ever seen one person move like that. We called her Spectre. She was lead instructor for Section 7's Advanced Solo Operative Program. The redacted parts of her file? That's us, sir. That's a decade of work, so classified most generals don't know it exists." Thorn finally tore his eyes from the screen and stared at Vance, his face a mask of disbelief. "Section 7? That's a myth. A budget rumor." "She's not a myth, Colonel," Vance said, his gaze returning to the monitor. "She literally wrote the doctrine for this kind of infiltration. High altitude, solo, minimal support. The Serpent's Tooth. This is a simplified version of her final exam." She's not running your course. She's running a memory. On the screen, Anya's hand reached out and slapped the summit beacon. The timer on every monitor in the room froze. For a long second, there was only the sound of the wind outside and the hum of the electronics. The technicians stared, dumbfounded. The soldiers outside craned their necks, waiting for the announcement. Then the numbers registered. 9 minutes, 17 seconds. 9:17. It wasn't just a new base record. It was 30 seconds faster than the new configuration had ever been completed. It was a full minute and a half faster than anyone had run it today. It was, as Sergeant Major Vance well knew, faster than the theoretical perfect time calculated by the course designers. It was 30 seconds faster than the legendary Navy SEALs record on the old, easier course. It was, for all intents and purposes, a world record. She hadn't just beaten the course. She had broken it. Anya stood at the summit beacon, her hands on her knees, her breathing deep and controlled, but not ragged. The snow was falling faster now, fat flakes melting on the warmth of her face. She looked out over the vast, unforgiving landscape, a kingdom of rock and ice, and felt a quiet sense of rightness. This was where she belonged. The control tower was a tomb. The technicians and officers stared at the frozen number on the screen, their minds struggling to process the information. 9:17. The number was an indictment of their own limited perceptions. Colonel Thorne stood perfectly still, his face pale. Sergeant Major Vance's words echoed in his head. Spectre. She wrote the doctrine. He looked at the grainy image of the woman in the file, then back at the live feed of the warrior standing on his mountain. He had called her a liability, a clerical error. He had tried to send her home. He had mistaken a lion for a house cat, and the sheer scale of his misjudgment was staggering. It wasn't just that he had been wrong. He had been spectacularly, monumentally wrong, in a way that shook the very foundations of his professional certainty. Down below, the crowd of soldiers was buzzing. The time had been announced over the public address system, a flat, robotic voice stating the impossible. A wave of stunned murmurs rippled through the ranks, quickly replaced by a roar of spontaneous, disbelieving applause. The Marine captain who had called her grandma stood at the base of the rock face, having been lapped by her on his way up, his face ashen with humiliation and a dawning, profound respect. Anya began her descent, not via the course, but down a simple service ladder on the back of the ridge. She moved with the same deliberate pace, the mission completed. As she reached the bottom, the snow was beginning to stick, blanketing the ground in a fresh coat of white. The applause and cheers died down as she approached. The sea of soldiers parted for her, their faces a gallery of awe, respect, and a little bit of fear. She walked toward the supply depot, her objective simply to return her gear and resume her duties. But her path was blocked. Colonel Thorne stood waiting for her. He had come down from his tower. Sergeant Major Vance was a step behind him. Thorne's face was unreadable, carved from the same granite as the mountain he commanded. He looked at her, at the dusting of snow on her shoulders, at the utter lack of triumph in her eyes. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't even smiling. She had simply done a job. He took a sharp breath, the cold air stinging his lungs. His entire command philosophy, his way of judging people, had been invalidated in 9 minutes and 17 seconds. There was only one thing to do, one correct, proper military response. In the ringing silence, under the gray, heavy sky, Colonel Marcus Thorne brought his heels together with a sharp crack. He raised his hand in a salute so crisp, so precise. It was a work of art. It was not the casual salute an officer gives a subordinate. It was the salute of a soldier to a superior, a mark of profound and absolute respect. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then, as one, every soldier in the staging area, from the lowest private to the highest-ranking officer, followed his lead. A forest of arms rose in silent tribute. They were saluting the logistics clerk. They were saluting the old woman. They were saluting Spectre. Anya stopped. She looked at Thorne, then at the sea of faces, at the gesture of respect offered so freely. A flicker of something, Not surprise, but perhaps acknowledgement, passed through her dark eyes. She returned the colonel's salute with a simple, clean motion of her own. It was an acceptance, a quiet conclusion. The matter was settled. She had her place. The blizzard descended that evening, a white fury that erased the world. The training center became an island in a sea of snow, the serpent's tooth a ghost hidden behind a swirling curtain. The base was locked down, its frantic energy replaced by a quiet, insulated hum. The quotas and deadlines were now irrelevant, postponed by the authority of the storm. Anya sat alone in the common area of Barrack C. The large window looked out into the pure, chaotic white of the blizzard. Most of the other soldiers were in the mess hall or the small recreation room, their boisterous energy amplified by their confinement. But here it was quiet. She held a warm mug in her hands, its heat a small anchor in the cold. She wasn't thinking about the record. She wasn't thinking about the salutes. She was deconstructing the storm, noting the patterns in the swirling snow, the sound of the wind as it pressed against the building. Her mind was always working, always analyzing. It was the only way she knew how to be. The respect she had earned wasn't a prize. It was simply a tool. It meant she would no longer be questioned. It meant if she identified a risk or proposed a solution, she would be heard. It meant she could do her job, whatever that job might turn out to be. For Anya, that was the only victory that mattered. Dignity wasn't given. It was the space you created for yourself to be effective. The door opened, letting in a gust of wind and a flurry of snow. Private Sato entered, shaking the white from his shoulders. He saw her by the window and hesitated for a moment, then walked over. He didn't say anything. He simply held out a fresh, steaming mug. "Coffee, ma'am," he said quietly. "I figured yours might be cold by now." Anya looked from the blizzard to the young man's face. In his eyes, she saw none of the earlier confusion or the recent awe. She saw simple, straightforward respect, the kind a soldier gives a trusted leader. It was a gesture more meaningful than the formal salute of the colonel. It was quiet, practical, and real. She took the mug, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you, Sato," she said. Her voice was as calm as ever, but there was a warmth in it that hadn't been there before. He just nodded, gave a slight, almost imperceptible bow of his head, and left her to her solitude. Anya turned back to the window holding the new mug. The blizzard raged, a powerful, untamable force of nature. Outside, the world was chaos and cold. But inside the quiet room, she was a point of absolute stillness. A silent guardian, a forgotten weapon returned to service, watching the storm, perfectly at home in the heart of it. The symbol of her presence lingered, an image of earned dignity, a quiet promise that even in the most hostile of places, true competence could not be hidden forever. She took a sip of the hot coffee. It was good. The work was done. For now.